You know that feeling when life looks good from the outside, but inside you're quietly falling apart? That's where David was. At 35, David checked every box society told him mattered. He had a stable job at a marketing firm. He lived in a modern apartment with sleek furniture, the kind you see on Instagram. He drove a car that turned heads at stoplights. And on social media, he looked like he was winning the game of life. Smiling vacations, expensive dinners, gym selfies, the curated highlight reel. But the truth? David was exhausted. Behind every smile was pressure. Pressure to prove himself at work. Pressure to stay in shape. Pressure to outdo his friends, to keep climbing higher, to be more. And yet, the more he chased, the emptier he felt. He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, scrolling through other people's posts. His friend bought a house. Another got engaged. Someone else launched a successful business. And David thought, why am I still stuck? Why am I not happy? That's the paradox Mark Manson talks about in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. The more we chase happiness, the more it slips through our fingers. The more we try to look good, the more fake we feel. The more we want control, the more chaotic life seems. David's life was a perfect example. He was giving too many fucks about things that didn't actually matter. Approval, image, status. The endless game of appearing successful. And the weight of it was crushing him. One night, after another long day at work, followed by another glass of wine he didn't need, David came across a book his friend had left on the coffee table. Orange cover, bold title, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. At first, he laughed. What kind of advice book swears at you? But something about the title stuck, because deep down, he knew. His problem wasn't that he didn't care enough. His problem was that he cared about everything, every little thing, and it was killing his peace of mind. So he started reading, and that's where the story of David's transformation begins. A journey from chasing empty victories to choosing what really matters. A shift from anxiety to clarity. Not by adding more, but by letting go. Don't try, the backwards law. The first lesson hit him like a slap in the face. Don't try. Sounds counterintuitive, right? David thought so too. He'd built his entire life on trying harder, pushing more, proving himself. But Manson explains that the constant chase, this desperate need to be extraordinary, is exactly what keeps us miserable. David saw himself in the story of Charles Bukowski, the alcoholic, unsuccessful writer who eventually became famous. On Bukowski's gravestone are the words, "Don't try." Not because he was lazy, but because he understood a strange truth. The harder you chase the idea of being good enough, the more you reinforce the belief that you're not. David realized he was stuck in this trap. Every time he told himself, I need to be more successful, more attractive, more popular, he was also telling himself, I'm not enough right now. That silent judgment was eating him alive. That night, David closed the book and whispered to himself, what if I stopped trying to be special? What if I stopped giving a fuck about looking perfect? The thought was terrifying, but also liberating. Over the next week, David noticed something else Manson described, the feedback loop from hell. When David felt anxious, he worried about being anxious. When he felt sad, he felt guilty about feeling sad. He layered emotions on top of emotions, spiraling deeper each time. It was like quicksand. The more he struggled, the more stuck he became. Manson's advice? Stop fighting it. Accept that negative emotions are part of life. Don't give a fuck about feeling bad. Just feel it. Then move on. So David tried it. The next time he felt jealousy scrolling through Instagram, he didn't berate himself. He just acknowledged it. Yep, I'm jealous. That's fine. It'll pass. And strangely, it did. The feeling faded faster than usual. For the first time in years, David felt a small taste of freedom. Not by fixing his emotions, but by letting them be. Slowly, he started seeing his life differently. He realized most of what he gave energy to, likes on a post, minor comments at work, gossip among friends, was meaningless in the long run. None of it would matter 5 years from now, maybe not even 5 days from now. But what about the things that truly mattered? His health, his close relationships, his personal values. He had been neglecting those while chasing things that looked good but felt empty. That was his first turning point. David began to understand the art Manson talked about. Not the art of not caring at all, but the art of caring only about what matters most. And this was only the beginning. The deeper David went into the book, the more he uncovered about himself, the lies he told, the values he chased, the problems he avoided. And with each insight, he took a small but powerful step toward changing his life. In the next stage of David's journey, he'd discover why happiness isn't about eliminating problems, but about choosing better ones, and how that realization would shape every decision he made from then on. As David kept reading, another idea stopped him in his tracks. Happiness comes from solving problems, not avoiding them. At first, he frowned. Wait, I thought happiness meant having no problems at all. But Manson argued the opposite. Problems are constant. They never go away. The only thing that changes is the quality of your problems. David thought back to his own life. He'd been working overtime, stressing about getting promoted. His biggest problem wasn't whether he loved his work. It was how to prove he was better than the next guy. And even when he did get recognition, it only created new problems. How do I stay ahead? How do I keep impressing? It was like running on a treadmill. Every victory was followed by another problem of equal weight. That's when he realized it wasn't about escaping problems. It was about choosing problems he actually wanted to solve. David listed the problems he'd been carrying, obsessing over how many likes his posts got, constantly comparing his career to others, worrying about whether people thought he was interesting enough, cool enough, good enough. The more he stared at the list, the more ridiculous it seemed. These weren't life-giving problems. They were shallow, endless, draining ones. He remembered Manson's question, what pain are you willing to endure? Not, what do you want out of life? But what suffering are you willing to choose? That question hit differently. Because everyone wants success, love, and happiness. But not everyone wants to endure the struggle that comes with it. And the struggles you're willing to endure reveal what you truly value. David asked himself, what pain am I willing to go through? He thought about his love for teaching others. He had always wanted to mentor junior colleagues, to explain concepts, to help people grow, but he'd avoided it because it meant extra effort, and sometimes embarrassment if he didn't explain something well. And yet, that was a problem he actually wanted. The awkwardness, the preparation, the trial and error. It felt worth it. On the other hand, constantly battling to look cooler online, that struggle felt empty. There was no joy in it, no growth. That's when David understood. Meaningful problems create meaningful lives. The next section of the book dug deeper into this idea. Values. Manson explained that not all values are created equal. Some lead to resilience and purpose. Others lead to misery. Bad values are externally focused, popularity, status, being admired, always feeling good. They're out of your control, built on shallow foundations. Good values are internally driven and controllable. Honesty, creativity, kindness, responsibility. When David read this, he winced. Because most of his life had been built around bad values. He wanted to be admired, envied, respected. But those were fragile, always dependent on someone else's approval. No wonder he felt so unstable. His self-worth rested on foundations he didn't control. That night, David made a small but radical decision. Instead of going out drinking with colleagues just to be seen, he stayed home and worked on something that mattered to him. He opened an old notebook and began writing ideas for a workshop he'd always wanted to create. Something to help people in his field navigate their careers better. For the first time in months, he lost track of time. He wasn't thinking about whether anyone would applaud him. He wasn't worried about whether it was cool. He was just engaged, fulfilled by the process itself. It didn't solve all his problems overnight, but it gave him a taste of what life could feel like when his values came from within instead of from the crowd. Of course, shifting values isn't easy. David soon discovered the onion Manson describes, the layers of self-awareness. First layer, recognizing what you're feeling. David had to notice when he was jealous, insecure, or afraid. Second layer, asking why. Why did likes on Instagram matter so much to him? Why did promotions feel like life or death validation? Third layer, understanding his values. Was he living for external approval or internal growth? Each layer peeled back another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes it stung. Sometimes it felt humiliating. But each layer also freed him. One of the hardest pills to swallow came when Manson said, "You are not special. You're wrong," constantly. At first, David bristled. He'd been told all his life he was unique, talented, destined for something big. And maybe he was, but believing he was special had made him fragile. Because every time he failed, every time life proved messy, it felt like betrayal. Now he started to see things differently. Being wrong wasn't the end of the world. In fact, being wrong was the gateway to learning. Admitting ignorance opened the door to growth. So he practiced it. Instead of pretending to know everything at work, he admitted when he didn't. At first, it was uncomfortable, but strangely, people respected him more. They saw him as authentic, not insecure. David was beginning to understand. Maturity isn't about certainty. It's about comfort with uncertainty. The next breakthrough came in a chapter about action. Manson flipped the script David had always believed, that motivation leads to action. In reality, it's the other way around. Action creates motivation. So David stopped waiting for inspiration. Instead, he just did something, anything. He drafted the first page of his workshop. He sketched a rough outline. He shared a half-formed idea with a colleague. Each tiny action gave him energy, and the more he acted, the more motivated he felt. It was a cycle, an upward spiral instead of a downward one. Weeks passed. David wasn't magically transformed. He still had doubts, bad days, insecurities, but something had shifted. He was no longer controlled by them. He had started choosing better problems. He had replaced shallow values with meaningful ones. He had learned to admit he was wrong, to act first, to stop caring about every little thing that didn't matter. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And for the first time in years, David felt a sense of peace creeping into his life. What he didn't know was that the journey wasn't over. The hardest lesson was still to come, the one about limits, about saying no, about facing mortality itself. And that lesson would challenge him more than any before. By now, David had begun to see small but real changes. He no longer obsessed over every little thing. He was choosing better problems, acting instead of waiting, and discovering values that felt solid instead of hollow. But life wasn't done testing him. Because the hardest part of change isn't starting, it's saying no. David had always been the guy who said yes. Yes to late-night work requests, even when he was exhausted. Yes to parties he didn't enjoy, just so he wouldn't miss out. Yes to relationships that drained him because he was scared of being alone. On the surface, it made him look agreeable, reliable, successful. But underneath, all those yeses came at a price. His time, his energy, his authenticity. Mark Manson writes that freedom in life doesn't come from unlimited choices. It comes from commitment, from narrowing down what you say yes to and fiercely saying no to everything else. David realized he'd been scattering his life across too many obligations, too many empty promises. He wasn't free. He was stretched thin. His first test came at work. His manager asked him to take on a new project, one that would mean more hours, more stress, but no real growth. The old David would have said yes instantly, desperate for approval. But the new David paused. He thought about his values, about the meaningful problems he wanted to solve. This project didn't align with them. So he took a deep breath and said, "I can't take that on right now." It was terrifying. His heart raced. He expected backlash, but instead, his manager simply nodded and gave the project to someone else. The world hadn't ended. He hadn't been fired. In fact, for the first time, David felt in control of his own boundaries. That one no was a breakthrough. The principle extended to his personal life too. David realized some friendships were built on convenience, not connection. These were people he drank with, gossiped with, complained with, but never grew with. So, he started pulling back. He stopped forcing himself to attend every gathering. He chose instead to spend more time with the few people who truly supported and inspired him. It wasn't easy. Some people called him distant or even selfish, but David learned that saying no to shallow relationships created space for deeper, healthier ones. Just as David was finding his footing, something shook him to the core. A childhood friend of his, someone the same age, someone healthy and ambitious, died suddenly in a car accident. The news hit David like a tidal wave. He hadn't spoken to this friend in years, but the finality of it crushed him. It forced him to confront something he'd been avoiding, his own mortality. Manson is blunt about this. He reminds us, "You're going to die. Everyone you know is going to die." And that fact is the ultimate filter for what matters. For days, David couldn't stop thinking, if I died tomorrow, what would I leave behind? Would my life mean anything? Or would it just be a highlight reel of shallow pursuits? At first, the thought of death terrified him, but gradually it began to feel like liberation. Because if life is finite, then wasting time on meaningless things isn't just unwise, it's tragic. Mortality gave David clarity. He stopped postponing the things he truly wanted to do. He finally launched the workshop he had been sketching in his notebook. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled through the first session, but he did it, and the participants thanked him for it. He also started repairing relationships that mattered. He called his parents more often. He reached out to his sister. He even apologized to a friend he had once hurt. Death reminded him that time was limited, and love should never be taken for granted. One evening, David reflected on everything he had learned. He realized he had far less control over life than he thought. He couldn't control accidents. He couldn't control whether people loved him back. He couldn't control the chaos of the world. But he could control how he responded. He could control his values, his actions, his focus. And that, Manson argued, is where real power lies. David no longer needed to control everything. He just needed to control himself. It had been months since he first picked up the orange book. His life didn't look radically different from the outside. He still worked at the same company. He still lived in the same apartment. He still posted photos sometimes, but inside, everything had changed. He was calmer, he was less reactive. He no longer chased approval. He no longer gave a fuck about every little thing. Instead, he gave his energy only to what mattered most. He hadn't become perfect. He hadn't eliminated problems. But he had chosen better ones. And that choice made all the difference. David's journey is the essence of the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Not apathy, not carelessness, but the courage to care less about the trivial and more about the meaningful. To embrace pain instead of avoiding it. To accept death instead of fearing it. To live with responsibility, not excuses. And in doing so, to live a life that is quieter, deeper, and more true. Months rolled into a year. David barely recognized the man he used to be. The anxious, approval-chasing, endlessly scrolling version of himself now felt like a distant memory. Not because life had magically become easy. No, his problems hadn't disappeared. Bills still came in. Work still had rough days. People still judged him sometimes. But now, David understood something vital. Suffering is inevitable, but suffering for the wrong reasons is optional. David no longer asked, "What will people think?" Instead, he asked, "Does this align with my values?" When he worked late, it wasn't to impress his boss. It was because the project mattered to him. When he spent weekends with friends, it wasn't to look busy on Instagram. It was because he truly cherished their company. When he failed at something, he didn't spiral into shame. He asked, "What can I learn from this?" Slowly, he realized this was freedom. Not the freedom to do everything, but the freedom to stop chasing what didn't matter. David's transformation didn't just change him, it changed those around him. At work, colleagues noticed his calm focus and began seeking his advice. In friendships, his honesty inspired others to drop the fake smiles and open up about real struggles. At home, his relationships grew warmer, more authentic, more grounded. People began asking him, "What's your secret?" And David would smile, remembering that little orange book, and say, "It's not about giving up. It's about giving a fuck, but only about the right things." Mark Manson ends his book with a simple but profound truth. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing pain that leads to growth, meaning, and love. David now understood that problems never stop. They only get better or worse, depending on the values you choose. And death? Far from being the enemy, it was the compass that pointed him toward what mattered most. David's story isn't unique. It's not reserved for special people. It's available to anyone. Yes, even you. So ask yourself right now, what are you giving too many fucks about? What problems are you avoiding instead of embracing? What values are driving your choices, and are they leading you somewhere meaningful? Because your time is limited, your energy is finite, and where you choose to invest it will define your entire life. If David's journey spoke to you, don't let it end here. Take one small step today. Say no to something that doesn't matter, or yes to something that truly does. And if you want more stories and lessons like this, subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs it, and drop a comment below about what you're ready to stop giving a fuck about. Together, let's focus less on the noise and more on what makes life worth living.